to over 200. Or can we start the stream on YouTube, please, as we will show the video twice? Or can we start the stream on YouTube, please, as we will show the... Hello.
The world is home to over 270 million people of communities discriminated on work and descent. Discrimination based on work and descent, DWD, is the UN terminology for systemic discrimination like slavery systems, including caste-based hierarchical systems in different parts of the world. This type of discrimination is pre- and post-colonialism and is rooted in the idea of purity and pollution. It manifests in practices such as casteism, untouchability, slavery, and anti-Gypsyism. Discrimination based on work and descent is a unique form of inequality, where individuals are targeted not based on their appearance, but on their ancestral heritage and profession. Unlike racism, which is about hating people because of their skin color and looks, discrimination based on work and descent happens among people who are alike in some ways. These communities face a range of discriminatory practices, including restrictions on socio-economic, civil, political, and cultural rights. They are also subjected to notions of purity and pollution and are excluded from civic amenities, such as education, health services, urban infrastructure, and access to justice. The discrimination faced by these communities often leads to violence, including assault, murder, rape, and false cases, especially when they resist discrimination and assert their rights and entitlements, be it Roma in Europe, Quilombolas in Latin America, Dalits and Burakuman in Asia, or Heritin in Africa. The members of CDWD are often subjected to violence when they demand their rights and entitlements. Women, children, and members of the LGBTQ community of CDWD are most vulnerable. However, these communities are fighting back and demanding their rights, including access to education, fair representation in the government institutions, the end of slavery and discrimination, and inclusion in policymaking and legal systems. They also demand access to financial resources, health services, and the right to own land and access to political participation and power. Let us stand in solidarity with these communities and work towards a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, equality and justice, regardless of their work and descent.
Friends, is it audible? Am I audible? Yeah. Welcome to this very important side event. I think we will start. It's a very critical aspect of the participation of dissent communities in public spaces and discourses. Looking at the challenges particularly youth face from communities discriminated on work and dissent. We have a very young and energetic, if you ignore me, the participants and the panelists here. And we are looking at an age where the youth dividend is almost 20% of the total population. And among that, you have a large population of communities who are discriminated on work and descent. And these communities have not only are unable to participate in the public discourse, the reason that they are excluded is because of cultural and pre-colonial systems which have existed and excluded them in several areas, from education, employment, participation in the whole aspect of climate justice, and several other areas which are critical for life. So here we have a very informed panelist who are looking at the youth dividend and the participation from Asia, Nepal, from Sri Lanka, from Ukraine, from Mauritania, and a global organization plan which is looking at the youth participation across the globe. So friends, we'll also have the special rapporteur. Unfortunately, he has to divide his time between the two side events that are going on at the same time. So he's going to join us after 30 minutes. One of the reasons we are forced to start a little early itself, mainly because we have a very restricted time, and he will join us midway. So without much ado, we just saw a video which looks at this global spread of the communities discriminated on work.
It is just not just about my community, Dalit community. It is the reality of over 270 million people around the world who are known as CDWD community. Today, I stand before you as a representative of the Nepali Dalit youth women, of course. I have a multiple identity. And today I am talking about the exclusion and underrepresentation of Dalit and youth and women in public space and discourses. Despite Nepal's progressive legal framework and affirmative action policies, Dalit youth and women continuously face systematic cultural and economic barrier for the participation and effective participation in politics and policy making. In Nepal, women are around 51%, and Dalits are 15% in national data, but NGOs, we know that they can't come front because of their hesitation and stigma. It's around 20%, of course. And their proportional representation is guaranteed by constitution. But if we saw the data of the presentation, it's very low. Recent election, around 7,000 Dalit women elected as a member of ward because of the compulsory provisions of the representation. But if we saw the data in House of Representatives, there are 5.82% of Dalits who are represented, and only one Dalit get the election ticket on, and win the election on the first past the post system. This shows our reality. Dalit women are oppressed within the oppressed people because they have to face the systematic discrimination based on their gender also. They face caste-based violence and sexual violence. And sadly, these survivors do not have access to justice. Although Nepal banned caste-based discriminations and discriminated, it is not yet in practice. So more than 20 Dalit were killed because of their caste after declared caste-based discrimination-free nations. So as a Dalit youth, why we should participate? Because our absence in participations makes others to misinterpret and misrepresent our struggle and voices. Participation is not just about having a seat in the table. It's about having a voice and opportunity to lead, to shape policies and build solutions to work together. To ensure the Dalit youth participation, we must focus on the following action points. First, there should be a substantive representation of Dalit youth in decision-making spaces, in local, national, regional, and global level, where we can represent our voice and transform the policies and agenda. Second, government and international organizations must not delay the effective address of caste-based discrimination in school, workplace, and political arena. Third, the government and international organizations must establish mentorship and capacity building training for the Dalit youth, especially focus on Dalit women. Fourth, we must strengthen the Dalit wings in the Dalit advocacy group to ensure our participation in civil society also. Finally, we cannot create the just world where some people are treated as less than human. When Dalit youth stand up and speak up, it sends a powerful message. That is, we are capable to lead the change, and we are fully determined to lead and build a society where we can recognize, heard, and respect as fellow human. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kunjani. Very powerful. That it is not just for the sake of giving a space, but because we can contribute to the nation building that everywhere, wherever we are. And therefore, you really need to make spaces to ensure at all levels, whether it's representation, advocacy, participation, and in decision making. Thank you very much. Thank you also for keeping to the time. Sorry for restricting. Now I request Dr. Nimalka Fernando, who is the co-chair of the International Movement Against Discrimination and Racism of All Forms from Sri Lanka, and also has been on the advisory council to the President of Sri Lanka. Yes, though not youth like me, she is one of the intergenerational links to ensure that youth dividend and youth equity is really ensured. Nimalka, because we are running a little late, may I request you to restrict it to 5 minutes? Sorry, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. This is a very important issue. Given the time limitation, I just wanted to say that one of the most problematic that we have in today's world in relation to human rights advocacy, in relation to political movements, is the lack of youth participation. And I'm very glad that GFOD is highlighting this issue, and I'm also very glad to see GFOD practically involving young people as minority rights experts. That is absolutely important. If you look around the world, in terms of even liberation movements, I would say one of the biggest problematic we have with the Buraku liberation movement in Japan, which pioneered the caste-based, work and descent-based advocacy within the UN system. And I was drawn in as a young person from Sri Lanka to join this movement in 1993, is struggling to find young leadership within the Japanese community to lead this advocacy. So therefore, I take this opportunity to encourage all movements and all civil society organizations, including UN, to give prominence to this special topic, how to give space. We know we can go on theorizing about the challenges, but why no youth participation at the local and regional level? It's not only the fact that youth are not there, but there have been structural impediments for youth, especially from the communities affected by work and descent. They are not getting the opportunity. So if I just run through some of the problematic areas, that would be education. In terms of education, what opportunity is there for these young boys and girls to acquire skills, to rise in an academic pursuit? Because most of the time when they have to come into public positions, academic and qualifications matter. So that I see, if you take Sri Lanka, for instance, up to now, only like 30 graduates coming from the plantation sector who we could classify as work and descent. And also from the rural backgrounds, we've given quotas for rural people to come into universities, but it is not socially identified. So most of the time, the high caste people from the rural communities get accommodation into universities, but not the lower caste youth. Employment opportunities, lack of skills, social integration. So this brings sometimes the youth into certain psychological stress. They are often kept by saying, we are not able to come into leadership. I've seen this. When we encourage young people from these communities to elect them into positions, they would definitely say, no, we are not ready. We don't have that leadership capacity. So skills development of leadership is very important. Now, we must also know that this issue of young people coming into social spaces is also a political issue. How much the political movements, in fact, the political movements that are talking about work and descent-based communities, their political power, how much they encourage young people to come into political movements, political power sharing. Now, if you take the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka, it is absolutely important that Sri Lankan state envisions a future where political power is shared. When you say political power is shared, the younger people from the Tamil community should be able to come into this space and hold leadership positions to envision their own future. So it is absolutely important that certain constitutional legal reforms take place, identifying specifically the need for political representation of young people representing ethnic, work, and descent-based communities, including religious minorities. Now, even in a, I would just like to share, in 1975, companies in Japan were found using a so-called buraku list to exclude burakumin communities from hiring processes, names, the places from where they come. In the hiring processes, often we find companies and even certain university processes using this kind of discriminatory process, and it requires affirmative action and specific positions that states should take to actually eliminate this kind of discrimination. The caste comes to remain in a religious scenario or in a feudal setting. But how do you combat that? By affirmative action, by providing equality provisions, and giving one would say adequate resources for young people, youth to come. So especially in the civil society, in the international NGOs, especially funding agencies have to now zoom in on promoting a kind of a vision in our, even in our partnership proposals maybe. When you are entering into partnership proposals with funding agencies, like the gender parity clause, you need to also look into clauses that would challenge us, that would also challenge civil society to incorporate youth from these work and dissent communities, affected communities. There are gaps in legislative provisions. Even though laws are there, they are not implemented. I mean, like Kunjini said, I mean, if you look at India, there are enough provisions, but what is the implementing and monitoring processes? Sometimes the youth do not have a legal recourse. A minority youth coming from work and dissent communities, when they find they are discriminated, where do they go? What kind of effective complaint mechanisms we have? And there is no remedies for victims most often. So they get doubly stressed. The fact that, you know, I'm not respected. My dignity is violated. Even today, I was in Sala 20. The minority rights, you know, representation. Often states would use right to interject. Even in that public space is stifled. So if this is happening at the UN, you can imagine at the local level, at our country level, how much minorities get affected. And the space, you know, gets blocked. So therefore, we need a totally comprehensive approach. But at the same time, I do not want to say that we are victimized communities. We are victimized communities. We are not victimized communities. Our rightful place has been denied. We have power within us, and that power has to be solidified together intergenerationally to continue to combat the discrimination we face. We need public space, we need political power, we need laws, we need resources to move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nimalka. Very critical elements have been brought. And how do we, sometimes you have provisions, but how do you make sure that are implemented and not as only victims, but ensuring that we are equal citizens which need the space to contribute? May I request now Ms. Veera Dranhoi from Roma Human Rights Protection Center, Ukraine, and she's also the Minority Rights Fellow from the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights. We're very happy to have you. Over to you, Veera.
Okay.
Yeah. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, and my friends. Thank you for being here and supporting me today. Today, this is really both an honor and responsibility to contribute to this vital discussion on the representation on dissent-based communities in public spaces and discourse, with a particular focus on the Roma youth in Europe. The Roma community, one of the largest minority in Europe, has historically faced systemic exclusion rooted in centuries of discrimination. Roma youth in particular carry the weight of this legacy while simultaneously leading efforts for equity, inclusion, and representation. However, their challenges have only intensified recent years due to a confluence and global and regional crisis. In my speech today, I will reference data from a recent study that conducted my colleagues and me at the Analytical Center TANED. This research, focusing on the state and needs of the Roma youth sector in Ukraine, sheds light on the challenges and opportunities they face, particularly in the context of war and systemic discrimination. I would like to start with one of the really hardest pandemic, COVID-19, that brought unprecedented disruption to education systems worldwide. Roma youth were among the hardest hit, as 70% reported financial difficulties preventing access to education during the pandemic. Online learning was largely inaccessible for Roma children due to limited internet access or digital devices in their households, further widening the educational gap. After that post-pandemic period, many Roma families struggled to rearrange with education system, perpetuating cycles of poverty and marginalization. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine has added another layer of complexity. War has displaced thousands of Roma families, with around 50% of Roma youth losing their homes or livelihoods. Displacement and economic instability have made it nearly impossible for many to focus on education, employment, or just even personal development. Safety concerns have restricted offline activities, limited opportunities for meaningful engagement, and further isolating young Roma from Ukraine. Systemic barriers in education remain a really critical concerns. Even before the crisis, such as pandemic and war, only 20% of Roma youth actively participated in civic initiatives. The majority faced barriers such as financial constraints, widespread discrimination, and limited access to formal education. And even today, near 62% of Roma youth feel their voices are inadequately represented in decision-making processes. Employment presents another uphill battle because Roma youth seeking jobs often encounter rejection based on stereotypes rather than their skills or qualifications. For Roma women, the situation is even more dire as they face dual discrimination on the grounds of ethnicity and gender. As many as 60% of Roma women report experiencing barriers to economic and political opportunities. Social stigma, amplified by digital exclusion, worsen these challenges. Negative stereotypes about Roma perpetuate marginalization, while online platforms, instead of fostering inclusion, often serve as breeding grounds of hate speech. And recent studies show that more than 60% of Roma youth experience cyberbullying or algorithmic biases that suppress their voices, making their struggle for visibility even more daunting. But despite these challenges, Roma youth have shown remarkable resilience. Organizations across Europe are working so hard to empower Roma youth and create opportunities for their development. I would like to mention just such organizations that really work so hard today, such as Human Rights Roma Center, Fond Chirikli, TANED, Ergo Solidarity Corps, Firenamenka. And I would like to say just a few words as a recommendations and I think that it's really important to expand support and scholarship for support Roma youth, invest in Roma-led initiatives, establish digital platforms, adopt robust anti-discrimination policies, and allocate equitable funding. So I think that the time to act is really now and today. Together we can ensure that Roma youth move from the margins to the center of societal transformation, shaping a Europe that values diversity, inclusion, and the contributions for all of these people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Veera. Sorry to restrict again. We are really in this environment of a really restricted time. But you have very clearly brought out the exclusion, further exclusion within the minorities, the whole question of Roma identity and how within the war and conflict they are further excluded, and in additional another layer because of pandemic. Education, safety, security, digital exclusion and hate speech, and most of all, the whole aspect of budgetary resources not being reaching to the community. And your recommendations, I think we really need to consolidate when the special rapporteur is also going to be here with us. Thank you very much. Maybe a little after, we'll also share what is the common thing with the Dalits and with the Buraku, with the Roma in Ukraine, and now we have another youth from Mauritania, Hassan Aija. He is from Mauritania and he will be highlighting the African perspective, focusing on the youth exclusion. Again, the community is discriminated on work and descent. Over to you, Hassan. You might have to use your interpretation. He will be speaking in Arabic and we will hear. Please. I also invite the special rapporteur. Please come in. Yeah, I think we could start. Please. Interpretation into the channel for Arabic English.
شكرا. أنا مسرور جدا كوني معكم اليوم. مشكورين أيضا على الدعوة اللي وجهتها لي للحديث عن واقع مرير يعيشه الشعب الموريتاني، لكن تعيشه بشكل خاص القومية التي أنتمي إليها، والتي هي قومية الحراطين، أي العبيد وأبناء العبيد السابقين. تبين التعديل؟ أوكي. واقع خاصة قومية الحراطين في موريتانيا، أي أبناء العبيد والعبيد السابقين. موريتان كما تعرفوا يعني دولة تقع في شمال غرب إفريقيا، تسكنها عدة أعراق إفريقية وعربية وبربرية. اللغة الرسمية للبلاد يعني هي اللغة العربية، لكن في الحقيقة أن الموريتانيين لا يتحدثون بالعربية. أنا أتكلم بالعربية لأني درست في المدرسة. بقية الموريتانيين لا يتحدثون الكثير من الموريتانيين لا يتحدثون بالعربية، يتحدثون باللغات المحلية الحسانية التي ينطق بها أو يتكلم بها أو يتحدث بها المجتمع الذي أنتمي إليه، وكذلك اللغة الأولوفية والصونيكية والبولارية والبمبارية. كذلك الكثير من الموريتانيين يتحدثون بالفرنسية، بما أن كان مستعمرنا كانت الدولة الفرنسية. نسبة الحراطين هي 50% من المجتمع الموريتاني، لكن هذه القومية غير معترف بها بالدستور، معترف فقط بقومية ما يسمى العرب، الذين فرضوا علينا أن نكون جزءا منهم رغم أننا لسنا منهم. نحن قومية مستقلة، لدينا تاريخنا، ثقافتنا، واقعنا المعاش، لدينا أيضا ماضينا وحاضرنا الذي هو فيه الكثير من العذابات والألم والعبودية والحرمان. هناك أيضا القوميات الأخرى كالبولار والسونيكي والولوف. المهم أننا نمثل 50% من المجتمع الموريتاني. هذه 50%، 40% منها هم عبيد، الآن يعني عبيد، أناس يولدون بالوراثة عبيد لأسر يعملون بدون راحة ولا أجر ولا صحة ولا تعليم، يتعرضون للاغتصاب، يتعرضون للتعذيب، يتعرضون لشتى أنواع الانتهاكات التي يمكن أن يتعرض لها الإنسان. بالإضافة إلى ذلك هناك العبودية المعاصرة وهي منتشرة بشكل كبير في موريتانيا، تشقيل القصر، وعندما تكون هناك قاصر تشتقل عادة ما يتم اغتصابها، يتم العبث بكرامتها. هناك الكثير من الموريتانيين الأطفال زوجوا قسرا، وهناك الكثير من الموريتانيين يعملون بدون أجور على المستوى يعني الأجور التي يحددها القانون خارج إطار القانون، لكن مفروض عليهم، الواقع يفرض عليهم ذلك، والسياسة اللي عامل الدولة الموريتانية تفرض عليهم ذلك. كذلك هذه القومية مهمشة من الناحية السياسية، لأن الإشراك السياسي لها غير موجود إطلاقا. أعطي مثال على هذا. نحن أسسنا منظمة اسمها منظمة إيراء في 2008، وقمنا بنضال كبير ضد العبودية في موريتانيا. تعرضنا للتنكيل، للسجن، للتعذيب، تعرضنا للحملات الإعلامية الكبيرة المجيشة ضدنا بكل أنواع الموريتانيين، على أساس أننا عملاء للغرب، وعلى أساس أننا عملاء لإسرائيل، وعلى أساس أننا لا نحب الدولة الموريتانية، لكن بقينا صامدين. من 2008 حتى 2020 تم التأسيس تم الترخيص لحركة إيراء، ومن 2013 يعني طرحنا حزب الرق، والذي هو حزب يعني يحمل قضايا كل موريتاني، لكن للأسف الشديد حتى الآن لم يرخص، رغم أننا عملنا اتفاقية مع حزب آخر وتحصلنا على نواب برلمانيين. نحن الآن نمتلك 5 نواب داخل الجمعية الوطنية يتحدثون باسم الموريتانيين جميعا، وهم من كل الجهات الموريتانية. ترشحنا 3 مرات للانتخابات، آخرها كنا في المرتبة الثانية بنسبة تفوق 2% من الشعب الموريتاني. لكن حتى الآن هذه القوة الجماهيرية والشعبية الموريتانية لا زالت خارج الإطار، ما زالت ممنوعة من أن يكون لديها إطار مشرع تعمل فيه، على أساس فقط أننا ننتمي لقومية سفلى بالمجتمع، ولا يحق لنا أن نعتلي كرسي الرئاسة. شكرا على الإطالة.
Thank you, Hassan. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the interpretation, but I think there were some issues, but we could get the grasp of the severity, which even today, the traditional forms of slavery exist in Mauritania, and they're very similar to that you have heard from Dalit, from Roma, from a little different from Buraku, but yet some of those aspects of purity pollution still exist. And thank you for the struggle that you have been waging, and that of the organization that you represent. We are now moving to Ms. Sukhbir Thind. She's the program officer for youth at the Plan International. And over to you, Sukhbir. Again, sorry for the restriction. We have 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I am with an organization called Plan International. Many of you may be familiar with Plan, but with our offices in Geneva and New York, we focus primarily on engaging youth from various parts of the world at the UN, so both in Geneva and in New York. It is an absolute honor to be on this panel of experts, especially with the youth experts, and to hear directly from them. And today I will outline a few of our strategies on how we can make that youth engagement meaningful as well as safe. And the way we do this is 3-pronged. So one is youth themselves as change agents, as we see today, with the youth speaking themselves on their own rights. It's also changing the UN itself to be more institutionalized, to have youth participants engage meaningfully. And lastly, it's also to change international policy to be more inclusive to youth and their rights. So starting with youth as change agents, it is incredibly important for youth to not only just be participants, but be actively leading the shaping of their agendas, both nationally as well as globally. And this, of course, has already been mentioned on the panel. This requires skills, capacitating them, sharing knowledge, so that they have the confidence to navigate and influence often systems that are intentionally made complex so only few can access them. So how do we demystify these complex systems for them so they can step into their power and dictate how their rights should be discussed? A point I want to emphasize, and it's already been discussed, although there's many overlaps within the youth group, which is quite broad, youth are not a monolith. Based on their political or geographical context, ethnicity, descent, gender, class, and other intersecting identities, they can face very different challenges and require attention to distinct set of rights. And all stakeholders and civil society, UN agencies, member states, as well as prominent youth groups themselves, we have to be very intentional and inclusive in our outreach and our work with youth groups. And this may take additional facilitation, it may take additional resources, additional time, etc. But it is an incredibly important part of being more inclusive and having the voices of many diverse youth into these very prominent spaces where their rights are discussed by people who are not them. A small example of this is young people in rural areas not having access to internet or not having limited network connectivity. How do we then ensure their inclusion? We have to plan ahead, we have to allocate resources, we have to adapt our approaches. It could include something as small as providing a data package to facilitate getting them a device they can access. And this was also mentioned in terms of lack of education or inaccess to education during the pandemic. We can also share opportunities through platforms like WhatsApp, which is more accessible for youth, and that's something they use amongst their own networks, rather than through email and through more formal ways of informing of opportunities or sharing UN opportunities, for example. And again, this action requires funding, which unfortunately is always a big issue. It requires time, more people, but these are very critical investments in having equitable representation at the UN. Another aspect I would like to discuss is tokenism. And Kunjani has already mentioned participation is not just having a seat at the table, like that one-off engagement in a panel, one-off engagement in an event in itself is not meaningful. So how do we then move away from symbolic gestures of inclusion and have more meaningful opportunities? How do we really tap into their potential and their right to be in these spaces? There are many positive examples of this. Many member states, many civil society organizations, as well as youth groups have youth advisory panels now that they work with to consult on various rights in the lead up to various bigger UN events. A positive example that we've been following, I work within a program called She Leads, is we engage with young people for 1 year, and we take them through this 1 year to engage in bigger UN events such as the CSW coming up next year, and then the Human Rights Council. So both engaging in New York and Geneva, highlighting the similarities and the differences, and really taking that 1 year to give them the capacity they need, give them the resources they need to understand the space, but also giving them an opportunity to say no to the space. The UN isn't be all and end all for advocacy and for engagement, so they can decide for themselves, is this an avenue that we want to engage in? Yes, no. If so, how do we facilitate that further? As an example of a positive engagement, these longer term engagements They allow youth not only to connect with us and other CSOs that are in the space, member states, as well as UN agencies. They also allow youth to connect amongst themselves, create stronger youth networks, but also provide sustainability beyond our work when it concludes with the youth group. Briefly, I don't think I have much time. I'll briefly move to changing the UN to be more inclusive, and I'll conclude after that. I think, as I said before, the UN system must institutionalize youth participation to move beyond more symbolic gestures. One of the key barriers I would like to highlight is logistics that many youth face when coming to the UN in Geneva, New York. Especially around visas, youth traveling, especially from the global south, having to acquire visas to come to Switzerland or to the US. Sometimes we know this, youth tell us this, the waiting period that the embassy gives them to get an appointment for a visa is 6 months. However, the UN agencies that are providing the invitation letter or the letter of confirming the registration, it comes a few months before the event itself. So it's entirely impossible for these youth to get a visa in time and be in those spaces. And this is a very persistent issue. We are all familiar with it. The youth talk about it, civil society talks about it. We speak with UN agencies about it. We speak to embassies about it, but it's an issue that continues to persist. And unfortunately, what this leads to is a lot of the youth that are most important to be in these spaces, they're not able to be in these spaces. Lastly, briefly, I know I'm out of time. I do want to say that meaningful, diverse, safe youth participation is not a privilege, even though, as we know, as it's been discussed on the panel, it's very, very difficult to get to the point of having that. It is a right, it is a necessity, and it's particularly important moving forward as we continue to exist in this multi-crisis world, facing shrinking civic space. It's particularly important to build a future that's equitable and to have just societies for youth and for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sukhbir. It's very difficult to summarize, but just to quickly point the issues. One, there is no need for a facade of participation. No need for a show of just a seat at the table. What we really need is budgetary resources, deliberate planning, and making sure they're part of the decision making. But another very important aspect that has come here is there are layers. Even among the youth, there are layers. I don't think we can see youth as one homogeneity. I think that is what Hassan and Kunjani and Veera and Nimalka have pointed out, because if you don't recognize the social order and the hierarchy and has excluded a large group of people on similar terms, across, whether it's Africa, whether it's Latin America, we don't have the participation, but Asia and Europe, you have communities who are intergenerationally excluded. And among the youth, they find youth is especially forced into forms of exclusion and even facing violence, all forms. And so it is even more difficult, especially language in English. And we know that even just mere English is really excluding the youth and other forms of participation. So within this kind of a multi-sectoral kind of violence, exclusions, and discriminations, what a challenge it is to make sure that in addition to the budgetary resources that are really needed. So with these, I would present and would be warmly welcome Professor Nicholas, the Special Rapporteur. We were also privileged last year. He's just taken the control of the mandate. Was there with the side event that we had, and we are very privileged, even though we had to share him part with the other. And now this. So over to you, Professor, for giving your words. But before you do, I would request, because we are also pressurized for time, release these report which talks about the status of the global, the global status of the communities which are discriminated across the world. And some of these are here. Some of you, I request the organizers to see if they can flash the QR code. You can download it, but please ask any of us, and we'll be very happy. And requesting all of us to share this report and Professor to release this report. Can we just stand for a good and release the report? Yeah. Just for a quick photo op. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. So, like in the old day, first you get the image and then you get the sound. So now I'll go for the sound part. I'm sorry I could not attend the whole event, but as I often say, there are so many minorities and only one special rapporteur, so I have to split my time between different rooms, which is not too complicated, and then all over the world, which is much more complicated. Actually, yes, I think this issue of communities discriminated on work and dissent is one of the most underrepresented issue in the multilateral system. As you may know, between 2006 and 2008, there was an attempt to create some momentum in the Human Rights Council on these issues, and it didn't go anywhere. So presently, and I think it is a shame, there is no mandate, no working group, no special rapporteur specifically dealing with this issue. And naturally, it is beyond my own power to create a new mandate, but it would really make sense, especially because several colleagues, special rapporteur, told me, oh, but you know, it is not a minority issue. Actually, there are so many of them in many countries that they are not minorities, so why should you deal with it? Good question. Questions are always important because it allows you to try to find answer and to debate. And it is possible that it is not a minority issue. I don't know. But what I know is that there is no specific mechanism, no specific mandate working on it. So by default, I am committed to work on that issue. But naturally, and I heard that, it could, in many situations, also concern my colleague dealing with modern form of slavery, all the aspect linked with the work, type of work. It certainly also concern my colleague dealing with racism. And actually, she's personally very aware of all the situation, considering her background. So, yes, how can we efficiently promote or try to find solution to these very pressing issues, which exist in many countries, not all, but many, and to seek for improvement, at least. I'm sorry, I mean, I'd love to seek solutions, but I know solutions are too far, but at least improvement. I think, and this is a conviction also, that youth engagement is very important. And sorry to say, for those who are more or less my age, well, no, I think you're all younger, good for you. My generation did not do very good. There were many opportunities, and well, now we look backward and say, oh, there were many opportunities. Yes, good. And so what? Because now it's much more difficult. We all know. Naturally, it's a time of uncertainty, and in time of uncertainty, there are also opportunities. Which one, I don't know, but there are. So we have to be on our toes and ready to take these opportunities. And again, probably too late for my generation to do it, but the next generation have to be given the potential place, access, so that they can effectively do something. Now, on a very specific aspect that you've mentioned, which is very worrying, for several reasons for me, which is the issue of visa and access to international multilateral system. It's a problem for me at several levels because I'm also a Swiss citizen, and Geneva being in Switzerland, Switzerland should, as a host state to UN, do much more, and they don't. And okay, I'm discussing with them, but it's difficult. It's no reason to give up. And actually, we also have problem with some mandate holders, which are not given visa to go visit countries and so on. So I will, in a very practical step, and I will finish there because I see the next meeting is already trying to get in. The special rapporteur, together, I think we can have a little weight. Not so much, but a little. And we're not really part of the structure. We're independent. And it happens that due to liquidity crisis, as they call it, financial difficulty, the meeting of special rapporteurs all together gathering, which should have taken place at the beginning of the summer, will take place in 2 weeks' time. So not next week, but the following here in Geneva, actually I think in this room. And I will put this issue to all my colleagues, special rapporteur, and we'll try to find a way to put pressure on the UN, on the host state, so Switzerland, US, but many other, so that this visa issue is somehow taken seriously, because it is very clearly a limitation which is not acceptable. I'm sorry I don't have time to go in more of the substance, but I'm sure we will continue working together. It is really important, and I will also try to, let's say, articulate what I'm doing with what the other concerned mandate holder are doing in this field. So thank you very much once again for having me in this meeting, and yeah, good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur, Professor Nicholas. Requesting the next side event just to give us a few minutes. I think this is a very important aspect of what you have brought in. We don't have a mandate specifically looking at communities discriminated on work and dissent. We are dismembered, some of us into part of racism, some of us into indigeneity, some of that into minorities, and some of them nowhere, but just general human rights. And I think your recommendation to ensure that in the next 2 weeks where you're having the mandate holders meeting, one suggestion to create a mandate on this, I think will be very, very important. But you're mentioning this layer within your report also, I think is very critical to see how, even though minorities, like in many countries, whether it's an African descent, Asian descent, even among the indigenous, there is a layer of social origin and the exclusions that we face. And the youth among us are actually excluded and discriminated. I think that aspect for you to cover would be excellent. I apologize to all of you because we should have had at least 3 or 4 comments from you. We don't have time, but we'll be very happy if you can message it or mail it, and we'll be happy to do. I don't think we have time to go further. So I would like to thank the panelists for your restricted time, but for your contribution, and to the special rapporteur for making the time. Thank you very much. Jai Bhim, Opro Roma, and Salve. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, for whoever wanted to stay in the room for the side event following on Cameroon, you're welcome to stay.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.